Picture this: one quiet moment, one decisive act, and the entire course of human history snaps like a dry branch underfoot. Empires rise or crumble, wars ignite or end, the powerful fall, and the world rearranges itself around the empty space they leave behind. Assassinations have always been more than murders. They are the ultimate high-stakes gambles, where a single life becomes the pivot for millions. Click the subscribe button so you don't miss out on Then, Now, Tomorrow videos about the history, present, and future of things that matter to us. Long before the word assassin existed, the pattern was already forming. Around 1155 BC in ancient Egypt, Pharaoh Ramesses III ruled a kingdom under strain from famine and quiet discontent. His secondary wife Tia wanted her own son on the throne. Inside the palace at Medinet Habu, those closest to the king, officials and servants who moved freely through his private world, waited for a festival when attention was scattered. The weapon was a blade, close and personal. Ramesses was struck. He lingered long enough for the wounds to be recorded, but the kingdom felt the blow immediately. The conspirators were tried, and most forced to end their own lives. What this shows is that even a ruler treated as a living god remained reachable by those who shared his roof. The moral weight sits in proximity. The people nearest to power often hold the greatest capacity to end it. In the aftermath, purges followed, and the palace never fully recovered its earlier sense of security. The records themselves became a warning. Centuries later in Macedonia, 336 BC, Philip II, father of the future Alexander the Great, entered a theater in Aige for a celebration. Among his bodyguards was Pausanias, carrying a private grievance. He stepped forward with a dagger. Philip fell in front of the crowd. Court stories from the same world also speak of poison as a quieter tool when open violence would draw too much notice. Philip's death opened the path for Alexander's conquests that reshaped the known world. The deeper current here is that the most carefully built protection can still fail at the point of human emotion. A single unresolved ambition inside the circle can undo years of statecraft. Power concentrates risk in those closest to it. Arrows added distance. Rulers who appeared in processions or hunts gave skilled archers time and space. Across cultures, the method returned whenever a leader needed to be seen, yet remained exposed. Visibility, the quiet truth runs, cuts both ways. On the Ides of March, 44 BC, Julius Caesar walked into a Senate meeting at the theater of Pompey. He had been named dictator for life. Brutus, Cassius, and more than 60 others surrounded him under the pretext of a petition. The weapons were ordinary daggers. Caesar fell beneath repeated wounds. The conspirators believed they were saving the Republic. Instead, they unleashed civil war. Octavian rose, and the age of emperors began. Standing back, one sees how rarely a symbolic killing produces the clean result its planners expect. Violence performed in the name of an ideal often destroys the system it claims to defend. One man's blood purchased an empire that lasted centuries, while the assassins' names became warnings.
In 1170, Archbishop Thomas Becket knelt at the altar in Canterbury Cathedral. Once a friend of King Henry II, he had become an obstacle over the rights of the Church. 4 knights took the king's frustrated words as a command. They confronted Becket and used their swords. His blood stained the floor. Henry sought to remove a problem and instead created a martyr. Pilgrims filled the roads. The king performed public penance. Some deaths generate more influence in memory than the living person ever held. Striking inside a sacred space can sanctify the victim and shame the perpetrator for generations. In the same medieval centuries, the Nizari Ismailis, remembered as the assassins, held mountain strongholds in Persia and Syria. Under leaders like Hassan-i-Sabbah, they trained devoted followers for precise strikes against selected political and military targets. Their reputation rested on patience, infiltration, and acceptance of death after the act. They reached heavily guarded figures when conventional force could not. Belief joined to discipline can turn a person into a more reliable instrument than any army. Their fortresses eventually fell to the Mongols, yet the name and legend traveled far beyond their political life. The Knights Templar, the military order of the Crusades, were warriors and bankers rather than a dedicated assassin society. Still, their secrecy and armed discipline attracted both fear and projection. When the order was destroyed in the early 14th century, charges of conspiracy clung to them. Secrecy itself can become a weapon in the public mind. In early 19th century Southern Africa, Shaka transformed the Zulu through military innovation and the firm removal of rivals. In 1828, he was killed by his half-brothers Dingane and Mhlangana, with a body servant's help, using the short stabbing spears of Zulu warriors in a moment of domestic proximity. The conqueror was undone by those nearest to him. The methods used to build power often returned to claim its architect. The militarized society he created continued under new leadership until it met European colonial forces. Asian history carries parallel threats. In Japan's Sengoku period, specialized operatives were used for infiltration and selective elimination when open battle was too costly. Imperial Chinese chronicles record poison and close-range blades inside palace walls during succession struggles. In more recent times, the Yakuza developed hierarchical structures that included targeted enforcement. In Mexico, the sicario emerged inside cartel organizations as a specialized, often expendable role for internal discipline and external messages. Once killing becomes a recognized function inside a closed group, it is absorbed into the logic of policy, profit, or ideology. Bomb attacks brought distance and spectacle. In 1881, Tsar Alexander II was killed in St. Petersburg by members of Narodnaya. An explosive device thrown after earlier failures fatally wounded him. The hoped-for change did not arrive. Repression intensified. Spectacular violence often hardens the state more than it liberates the public. Penetrating tight security or reaching height appears repeatedly. In 1966, South African Prime Minister Hendrik Verwoerd was attacked inside the House of Assembly by a man who had gained ordinary access. Elsewhere, elevated positions, windows or platforms, have created angles ground-level protection struggled to close. Every perimeter still depends on human movement and judgment. Poison retained its place when deniability mattered. From ancient courts to certain modern state operations, including the 2018 nerve agent attack on Sergei Skripal in Salisbury, the logic of quiet removal with ambiguous traces has persisted.
In 1865, Abraham Lincoln was shot at close range with a small derringer in Ford's Theater by John Wilkes Booth. The president's death turned him into a martyr and hardened Reconstruction. In 1914, Archduke Franz Ferdinand was killed in Sarajevo by Gavrilo Princip with a pistol after a bomb attempt had failed that morning. The shots helped trigger the First World War. In 1963, President Kennedy was struck by rifle fire from an elevated window in Dallas. The nation watched the aftermath in real time and never fully recovered its earlier confidence. In 1995, Yitzhak Rabin was shot at close range after a peace rally, and the peace process fractured for years. Each episode follows a familiar arc: study of routine, a tool matched to opportunity, a moment when protection thins, then consequences far larger than the physical act. Power concentrates vulnerability. The desire to control the future by eliminating one life consistently underestimates the disorder that follows. Institutions adapt, yet the next determined person or group tends to believe the old lessons do not apply. Looking toward the future, the tools will continue to evolve while the underlying human calculus remains. Imagine a scenario in the mid-21st century in which a polarizing leader moves through a heavily secured international summit. Traditional perimeters of guards, scanners, and electronic countermeasures are in place. The threat arrives instead through networked microsystems that exploit commercial logistics, biometric data, and autonomous navigation. Delivery becomes quiet, attribution difficult, and the medical appearance of the outcome delays recognition that a political act has occurred. In another speculative line, long-range precision systems guided by persistent surveillance reduce the need for the attacker to be physically present at all. The introspection does not change. Every new capability still depends on human motive, planning, and the willingness to accept consequences. The moral remains that the desire to reshape the world by removing one life is as old as recorded history. Analysis suggests that as detection and protection grow more sophisticated, so will the search for the single unprotected path, whether through technology, insider access, or the simple exploitation of routine. The story of assassination is ultimately the story of power meeting human nature. The weapons change, the pattern does not. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more videos about the history, present, and future of things that matter in our world.